Log Horizon, Volume, Chapter, Catastrophe. Audio source, WuxaWorldAudiobook.com. A tree stump a few meters tall was there just as he had guessed. He went around that stump and made a turn at the two-story building. It was right where he remembered it. Green moss had spread throughout the land. The asphalt, once ubiquitous, appeared infrequently here and there. Shiro dashed through the ruins. The buildings stood in close succession, coiled and sometimes pierced by giant, ancient trees. He was running past scenery that he hadn't seen before, yet it still felt somewhat familiar to him. There were silhouettes of people curled up in the streets. These were likely adventurers in the same situation as Shiro. Their moans and screams made Shiro forcibly suppress the fear that gradually rose up in his throat. But he was barely putting up a show. "What's happening? I'm strange. What's this? Someone get out here. Hey, Game Master. Are you listening?" Their screams sounded like dying animals. Those excessively miserable screams brought back a tiny amount of composure in Shiro. To not scream like that was the sole thought keeping him going. "I can move my body as I like. It's uncomfortable because the size of my limb seems to be slightly different. Thankfully, not by much." What spread before his eyes was the city of Akiba. Many abandoned buildings were intertwined with ivy, reaching out vigorously from the asphalt here and there. The vines blended with the ancient, spirit-blessed trees. Nostalgia washed over him. This was the hometown of many players, the largest city of the Japanese server of Elder Tales. Akiba. Ridiculous. Have I gone nuts? Someone, answer me. A man cowering nearby shouted. Everyone was dressed as a citizen of a Middle Ages fantasy world, wearing full-length clothing or even armor. That was normal. Elder Tales was the world's largest class of massive online games with a theme based on a world of swords and magic. But then, it was just a game. The wind brushing onto Shiro's cheeks was cold, moist and refreshing, like he was in the middle of a thick forest. The air was different from the dry and somewhat prickly air in Tokyo where Shiro lived. The wind, twisted with the smell of greenery, told him that this place wasn't the world he was familiar with. Shiro shook his head and thought back. He was playing Elder Tales. He remembered facing his desk at home and enjoying the game displayed on his LCD monitor. Elder Tales was actually a long-running title, boasting a 20-year history. Of course, its contents and game engine were replaced with the latest version by frequent software updates. But its abundance of data and deep game traditions accumulated from its long operation were what won the popularity of its users. Today should have been the day to commemorate the release of the 12th expansion pack of Elder Tales. The data he had downloaded beforehand would be lifted of its restricted status and would bring about new items, new zones, new monsters and battles. And, above all else, raise the level cap of the world of Elder Tales. Today was also the very day the expansion pack was brought live, so there should be a great number of players connected to the game world. Shiro didn't have a sound way of investigating that, but the fact that many of his friends were connected was confirmed from his friend list. Shiro was a veteran player in Elder Tales. He started this game when he was in middle school, and had been playing it for 8 years. There were over 100,000 players in Japan alone. The number of fans worldwide exceed 20 million. The massive online game had mesmerized Shiro for a long time. He had, of course, been looking forward to this expansion pack. However, he felt awkward about frolicking about in it like a newbie, so he decided to pass time as usual. He'd been practicing hunting at a beginner area, tutoring a pair of twins with some general advice and explaining the usage of items. But there his memory was abruptly cut. Shiro remembered seeing some sort of demo. Words of Shin flames in a black scene. The sky was filled with sticky darkness like asphalt scrolling quickly in a white moon that cut out at blackness. However, that was it. And now, Shiro was running in Akiba as his own pair of legs that had turned real kicked off the ground. A rhythmic sound like that of a xylophone being played rang in his ears. This familiar chime was an alert notifying him of an incoming telepathic call. Shiro concentrated on his forehead in a way like he was squinting his eyes and selected a menu that appeared in his mind. After being sent flying to this game world and letting go of the panic he felt at first, Shiro had quickly picked up these controls. "You here yet, Shiro? I'm almost there." Shiro listened to the voice of his dear old friend as he made another right turn at an abandoned building on the verge of collapse. The clear sound of him cutting through the top of the trees and a humid smell were carried by the gentle breeze. And then there was the dazzling light. This brightness was something one couldn't experience unless one witnessed it in early summer. Under the cool winds, instead of bringing heat, the sun rays simply burst with white radiance. A pure, overwhelming intensity of light. The city was illuminated by the light of early summer. The ancient giant trees and buildings cast deep black shadows on the main streets covered in black soil and asphalt. The contrast was beautiful. The scene that was spreading out before Shiro's eyes was something he had seen countless times: the hometown of the game world, the city of Akiba. However, that scene had an overwhelming sense of realism that was impossible for a game, and it was enveloping Shiro completely. Shiro was sprinting in this scenery with his very own legs. Every step he took, he felt the slipperiness of wet moss crushed by his soul. He felt his heart strongly pumping his blood to every nook and cranny of his body, which was heating up from the exercise. This was something he couldn't doubt. This was reality. The city was indeed as Shiro remembered it, the city of Akiba. The crumbling ruins, the repeatedly extending barrack bars, and the old trees spreading their roots on the road were all swallowed by a green forest even as they coexisted. This was the game setting of the holy ground of the ancients. This was Akiba. Within the League of Freedom towns east of arching archipelago Yamato, Akiba was the hometown of the players and the core city of the Japanese server in Elder Tales. He ran through the center of the street and made a turn at a corner of a three-story inn and bar. The crumbling ruins were buildings made of concrete, Suftech, Yoshikayama Electronics, Kulta Tower, etc. Various buildings and famous places gave the impression of the real world's Akihabara, and they were reconstructed as ruins of an older era in Elder Tales. The legacies of the old era were sleeping here and there in this world. They could be giant underground ruins or towers that pierced the skies. This city of Akiba was a legacy itself. As if clinging on, buildings made of logs were extending the giant concrete structures that were on the verge of becoming rubble, and all of that was embraced within the bosom of the ancient trees. The scenery was miraculous. After Shiro arrived, Naotsugu, who was sitting on concrete debris, stood up and received him. The lights shone in from holes without window frames in the wall, illuminating the two of them better than any game engine could have managed. Naotsugu looked pale, but he still laughed heartily and slapped his sheath. He was a bit more than 1.8 meters tall, wearing dull but remarkably strong steel armor over his sturdy body. Naotsugu had a shield on his back and looked like an ancient heroic warrior in his get-up. "Hi, Shiro." Naotsugu, good morning. Shiro didn't know how to react when he heard Naotsugu's greeting, and fell back on this plain cold greeting. Elder Tales had a standard voice chat system. Players were able to communicate while playing the game by using speakers and a microphone, like chatting on the phone. Some players didn't like to use voice chat and insisted on text messages, but Shiro and Naotsugu were not like that. That was why Shiro remembered and was very familiar with Naotsugu's voice. Naotsugu Hasegawa. If anyone asked Shiro who was the most reliable person in the game, he would be among the first few choices that came to mind. Online gaming referred to playing a game through the internet. Elder Tales was massively multiplayer online, or massively multi-user online game. Several hundreds or thousands of players would be connected to the same game space to play this game. In other words, this type of game allowed players to know many other players, working or competing with each other. Shiro had played Elder Tales for many years, so he knew quite a lot of people in the game. but the people you knew in the game remained in the game. Different people might have different playing styles and opinions, but most people would not reveal their real identity in the game world. With the increase in online crimes after the year 2000, protecting your personal data was common sense for the online community. But that didn't mean you couldn't make real friends. Naotsugu knew Shiro's real name, meaning Shiro gave him his contact details and was one of the few players that had met with him offline as well. Shiro let out a sigh of relief when he heard Naotsugu's voice. They might have met in person before, but they had spent much more time conversing through the game screen. Naotsugu spent countless nights with Shiro in the debauchery tea party, visiting countless border zones, experiencing countless battles together. He was one of the players in Elder Tales whom Shiro was great friends with. They had chatted about so many things under the skies. They even discussed their boring feelings. Naotsugu was completely unlike a friend he only met in a game. For Shiro, this cheerful and reliable voice was the symbol of Naotsugu. What's this situation? Did Elder Tales evolve to this level while I wasn't playing? To be honest, this is too real for me. This isn't possible with just improving the level of particle effects and rendering machines, right? Is this a joke? Naotsugu pouted as he asked Shiro. His cheerful and chatty voice sounded a bit depressed. This is nerve-wracking. Shiro vaguely nodded and raised the magic staff in his hand. Come on, this is a magic staff. Magic staff. This was a commonly seen item in fantasy games and was just up to Shiro's shoulder in height. It was made by grinding and bending a long and slender tree branch and reinforcing it with metal. Just like a magic staff used by mages. The only place you could find this was in a role-playing store. He probably noticed Shiro's silent reproach. Naotsugu bent his head to check himself out. He was wearing steel armor that seemed to weigh dozens of kilograms, with a shield on his back and a sword with an elegant hilt on his waist. Naotsugu looked like a warrior in a fantasy setting. Hey, I look like a role-player myself. That's right. Even though they were not sounds of joy, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. Now that you mention, you look the same. You too. The two of them observed each other's appearance. Shiro and Naotsugu were basically game characters in Elder Tales. The characters in the game were originally constructed using 3D models, a far cry from the real world. But the two of them existed for real in this world, in which everything was as detailed as reality. But if you looked closely, this was not turning the game into reality. As a game, the characters of Elder Tales were designed for both males and females. Since it was a monthly subscription game, there were very few players who intentionally chose ugly appearances. To meet the demand of the players, the market would use beautiful 3D models. But Naotsugu was not just turning his stylish character in Elder Tales into reality. Shiro had seen him in real life several times, and he looked exactly like Shiro remembered. Naotsugu, your face looks very similar to your real face, doesn't it? With the scar that ran through the brow of his game character gone, Naotsugu's face revealed his own bright eyes with slightly drooping corners. His adult face had a boyish grin on his lips. You too, Shiro, a scholarly man with glasses and wicked beady eyes. There were friends who described Shiro this way, and his features seemed to be reflected on this body. As Shiro thought about this, he gave the standard answer he used countless times. Can you just ignore that? What is the current situation? Tell me if you know anything. Black hard glasses. I personally want to tell you, but I don't know anything. Shiro and Naotsugu kicked away the shattered debris and sat down. Shiro didn't have any information to explain the current situation. Compared to the suburban area Shiro woke up in, this was closer to the center of Akiba. If you listen carefully, you could hear the buzz of the city from here. Firstly, this is not a dream. Yeah, Shiro nodded and agreed to Naotsugu's inquiry. When he regained conscious, he was in a familiar place that didn't exist in the real world, which seemed like the game he was playing. Elder Tales was a fantasy game with a world of sword and sorcery as its backdrop. Players could create their characters, adventurers, and travel through the world from their character's view. The body that Shiro was controlling, like his own, was a character he controlled in the game, Shiro. But the appearance of this character seemed to reflect the real face of Shiro. Have you seen the status screen? I have. Since Elder Tales was a game, the strength, stamina, and all sorts of abilities were represented in the form of numbers. All sorts of commands in the game were input through the menu. There were no such game-related screens anywhere you looked in this world. If you focused on your forehead region, the world would present a translucent status screen displaying all sorts of values and graphs. By controlling the cursor with your mind, you could perform all sorts of action. Both of them realized this about half an hour after waking up. They also discovered the telepathy function. This was a function to contact your friends that were online in the game. In the Elder Tales world, this function was similar to a cell phone, allowing players to contact their friends from far away. However, they could only contact people registered on their friend list. Focusing on his forehead and browsing his friend list desperately with rusty controls, Shiro had been shocked and he shouted when he discovered that Naotsugu was online. Naotsugu was surprised when Shiro contacted him through telepathy, but he quickly agreed to meet up at the ruins nearby. The silence hung between them as both of them thought about what to say. But the answer was obvious. Shiro had a better grasp of the situation than Naotsugu. From what Shiro knew, Naotsugu hadn't logged into Elder Tales in the past 2 years. Shiro told Naotsugu everything he knew. Everything wasn't much. If it were about things that happened during the 2 years when Naotsugu wasn't around, they could have talked all day. But Shiro had no clue regarding the reason and background as to why they were involved in this perplexing event. What he could confirm was that he installed the expansion pack, Novasphere Pioneers, and was playing with beginners just outside of the city when the incident happened. The place looked the same as the starting point of Elder Tales, Akiba, and they seemed to be in the game world. They had the same bodies as their characters and retained all the items and equipment they had in the game. Now that I think about it, how are the twins doing? I need to check on them later. But Shiro didn't know why this was happening. As Shiro narrated, Naotsugu listened carefully. When unfamiliar terms popped up, he would ask about them, but he didn't interject with his own opinions. Shiro didn't like noise. He was fine with lively and festive atmospheres, but he disliked chaotic hustle and bustle. Naotsugu was cheerful and mischievous, but he was smart enough to listen to others. Their characters differed, but they hit it off well. Maybe they both had the generosity to compromise with each other. I see. Alternate world. An alternate world has sucked us in. Fantasy has become reality. So Naotsugu, why are you here? Making a comeback. Naotsugu replied, yeah, I heard about the new expansion pack, and things at work were coming down, so I logged in to take a look. Come back. So Naotsugu was coming back. So Naotsugu was planning on coming back. He recalled that Naotsugu was 2 years his senior. Shiro met Naotsugu 4 years ago. Shiro was already a veteran player in Elder Tales then. It was normal for a middle school student to play with computers in that era, but Shiro was one of the few homely types. Put simply, even if he went out, his heart was still at home. He was a kid who was lonely even in a crowd. Even after moving on to high school and college, he maintained this form of entertainment, touring the virtual world every day. Elder Tales already had a special place among online games back then. If you wanted to play a challenging game with incredible content, it had to be Elder Tales. This was the view of the game amongst the players. For instance, Elder Tales had a grand vision, the Half Gaia Project. It might sound ridiculous, but the goal of the project was to recreate Earth at half its scale. The starting city for Japanese server was Akiba, corresponding to Tokyo in the Japan archipelago. North American servers had the Big Apple and South Angel as starting cities. Japanese and American servers were just convenient names to refer to. The online world was made up of many different servers connected to each other, so it was theoretically possible to head for other continents or even the end of the world. Hence, one of the selling points of Elder Tales was the ability of players to travel to other servers, something normal MMOs could not emulate. The Half Gaia project was a long-term goal. The current game was not a perfect rendition of the real world. In Elder Tales, the world was divided into many zones, each with its own territory and boundaries. The vast sea of trees in Mount Fuji was a zone where ferocious monsters lurked. The dungeon Shinjuku Metro Complex was a stage for adventure, and the city of Akiba was a non-combat zone. Going deeper, a room in a hotel was also a small zone. Some zones could be traded. If you accumulated enough in-game coins, you could be a land or homeowner. All zones were connected in their own ways. Open plains, for example, didn't have boundary demarcations, so players weren't able to tell which zone they were actually in. When they moved across zones, they wouldn't even notice. Some zones had obvious demarcations, like some buildings and rooms, which were individual zones connected elsewhere through a door. From what Shiro knew, the Japanese server managed tens of thousands of zones. With such a scale, the developing company had to outsource to other major gaming companies, and knowledgeable veteran players like Shiro were convenient, reliable existences. Shiro had been invited by many guilds during his long tenure in the game, and had joined a guild temporarily, thinking of it as a trial. Guilds were the most common way for players to form a group in Elder Tales. After entering a guild, players could access the guild account in the bank and use the guild warehouse to manage their equipment easily, as well as other convenient services. The guild members kept in touch with each other, so it was easy to form raid parties. So most players in Elder Tales joined a guild since it was convenient and had many benefits. Since Shiro liked to research the game contents and even got news from foreign servers, his knowledge was better than that of other veteran players who had played as long as he had. From this perspective, Shiro was someone who could contribute greatly to whichever guild he chose to join. No player could grasp the details of all the zones perfectly. Shiro was also not a genius of that level. But things like main routes, the connections between zones, or the transport devices known as fairy rings could shorten your transportation time greatly. What you could buy at which zone, or where you could hunt for a specific monster, this knowledge need to be accumulated slowly over time. Countless zones, endless varieties of items and monsters, missions known as quests, all kinds of ancient lore and knowledge, and anything else the developers could think of. The culmination of all these was Elder Tales. But Shiro could not get used to relationships that included elements of convenience and benefit. He had mellowed out now, but the Shiro back then was much more stubborn and naive. And an embarrassing neat freak. Even if Shiro didn't make many requests of others, he didn't know how to decline others. He didn't reject them, but his feelings didn't accept them either. There were all sorts of people in the game world. As long as there were people, there would be both pure and impure relationships. For the middle school Shiro, this might have been too shocking. Shiro noticed that he was being used like a walking encyclopedia. Along with his high-level character, he was dragged around like an all-purpose tool to fight for the convenience of others. Shiro couldn't adjust to this type of relationship or reject it tactfully, so he chose to leave the guild and mingle with others in temporary raid parties by himself. Before Shiro realized it, he had become a famous solo player with both deep knowledge and a high-level character. As his fame grew, he fell deeper into solitude. Neotsugu met him when Shiro was starting to get stronger and travel alone, having given up on guilds. Shiro was starting to grow numb to the feeling of solitude. Shiro and Neotsugu met in the Debauchery Tea Party. The Debauchery Tea Party was not a guild. It was just the Debauchery Tea Party. There was no other way to describe it. It was just a group of players who just happened to congregate there. Even though they just happened to be there, but they were always there and ready to go. That was the place Shiro belonged to. The guilds they joined were different. Their characters were not the same. They had nothing in common. They just gathered in the ruined building. Sometimes in the plains, other times on the hills where you could see the stars. This group went on adventures. Elder Tales was a sword and sorcery-style fantasy world, set thousands of years into the future. This was the setting the players bought into. According to the legend of Elder Tales, there had been a massive war on Earth, shattering the old world, which was miraculously reconstructed by the gods into this one. This was a common mythical setting seen in fantasy games. Common mythical monsters like orcs, goblins, trolls, giants, chimeras, and hydras roamed the lands. Most players found joy in battling, gaining EXP and leveling up after defeating monsters, looting powerful and rare treasures. This was the common way to play Elder Tales. But this was just grinding and farming, not real adventuring. Fighting repeatedly and adventuring were different things. Shiro discovered that for the first time in the debauchery tea party. And he could always see her in the debauchery tea party, as well as companions who were helping her. Shiro was also a companion there. The people Shiro met in the debauchery tea party might be the first friends he met in Elder Tales. Neotsugu was one of them. Since you were coming back, that means your job was stabilizing? Yeah, it is more or less stable. This has been a hectic year. The debauchery tea party went on for 2 years, which was the most fulfilling and joyful period in Shiro's time in Elder Tales. But after some incidents, the debauchery tea party, which created many legends, came to an end. One of the reasons was Neotsugu taking a break away from the game. During the winter of that year, Neotsugu wasn't able to go online for a period of time because of his busy work schedule. Several people also left the game at that point due to personal reasons. The debauchery tea party was not a guild. Since it was not a guild, they did not have any obligatory relationships. Although everyone was all grown up and wouldn't say it due to embarrassment, this group treasured their friendship very much. It was not decided by anyone. The debauchery tea party just went on an indefinite hiatus. They thought about inviting new friends to carry on the congregation, but that would be a different adventure and story. Although the debauchery tea party ceasing to function made them sad, no one hung their head in regret. They enjoyed many more adventures than most people. That was rewarding enough. Work was finally on track and going sort of smoothly right now. What really sucks is that there are no cute girls there. That doesn't matter, right? Shiro brushed off Naotsugu's complaints. Neotsugu could be described as hero. Shiro thought Neotsugu had more courage than him. It might be recklessness in some situations, but Shiro had never seen Neotsugu stop being a chatterbox no matter what happened. What's with your eyes? Closet pervert look. I'm not a closet anything. Yes you are. There are 2 types of men in this world, open perverts who admit it and closet perverts who don't. I am an open pervert who likes panties. Shiro is a closet pervert who definitely likes panties. The ridiculous theory made Shiro pout. But Shiro wasn't angry. Neotsugu had always been sensitive about others and his words were meant to lighten the mood. Even if his dirty jokes might trouble others, Shiro was a healthy man, so he was also interested in the opposite sex. He knew that he could take this level of joke and conversation. I also like although I like girls, I still have standards. I know personality is important, but you can still be attracted by their appearances. You might be right, but we don't need to stoop so low, right? Yeah. Neotsugu gave a big sigh. Shiro nodded. He understood Naotsugu's point. Even if work had calmed down, there was no need to take a vacation in the virtual world. And with things like this, can we really go back? Neotsugu said jokingly. All the other players trapped in this world should be asking the same thing. Neotsugu expressing this suffocating problem in such a joking manner showed his mental tenacity and his concern for Shiro. I was thinking, maybe a new god just took over, and had a delusional fantasy. It is so cruel to trap us this way. Really, the whole world has turned upside down. Is this some type of festival? Yeah, let's not have any expectations that we can go back anytime soon. Your way of accepting this situation also seems ruthless. Only suicidal people will show mercy when they know what is going on. As expected of the tactician of the Tea Party, Neotsugu replied condescendingly, then shook his head and said with a serious expression, "Right, no expectations for now. So going by the fantasy novel settings, we need to survive by our own from now on?" He was not happy about this, but Shiro nodded and agreed with Naosugu's questions. According to Shiro's memory, he had done everything as usual, living normally, taking baths, logging into Elder Tales, and fighting monsters with the beginner twins before his consciousness was cut off. Everything he did was about the same as usual, but he was forcefully trapped in this situation. It might be due to some external factors or some mistake he made, but there was no way for Shiro to find out. There might be some way out of this situation, an alternate world, but Shiro didn't know how at this instant. In other words, be it searching for a way back or going back to the old world by some unknown external mechanism, they need to live in this world before that happened. We might wake up in our old world if we die here, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. Acting like that would be the same as borrowing $1 billion from loan sharks because you think the earth might explode. Doesn't seem like a wise choice. If dying here meant dying for real, that would be a waste. That's right. But tactician Shiro, it shouldn't be a problem if we just want to survive, right? Is it? We are level 90, right? It might be bad if we need to challenge a difficult zone, but it shouldn't be hard just living on, right? We have money, we have equipment. My equipment is a bit outdated, but it is still serviceable, so there shouldn't be any problem, right? Elder Tales was a RPG that used level systems. Both Shiro and Neotsugu were at level 90, the previous level cap in this world. But this was not something worth mentioning. About half the players were level 90. Elder Tales had a long history, and similar to other online games, it had went through hundreds of updates, adding all sorts of game elements. Although Shiro didn't experience that period, the level cap when Elder Tales just started was 50. The players enjoyed the Elder Tales world and would grind their characters to the level cap, and request for more adventures from the developers. To meet these demands, the developers pushed out an expansion pack. It had new enemies, dungeons and adventures, as well as a higher level cap for the heroes to become stronger. There had been several level cap revisions since then. The latest one was 90. The cap of level 90 came with a Sacred Heart expansion 3 years ago. The official announcement for the Novosphere Pioneers expansion pack included an increased level cap to 100. This meant the players would have time to grow their adventurer's avatar. Before the release of the new expansion pack, half the players were already at the level cap, and there was nothing strange about it. I don't think this is it. Why? Neotsugu was not discouraged even when facing such a situation. Shiro admired Naosugu's optimism. Shiro didn't have his mental strength. Shiro was filled with unease. His heart analyzed the situation as if it were driven by this sense of unease. We came to this alternate world. Though we do not know if this is simply a game world, but we were sucked into this situation. That is already a strange matter. Yeah? Hey, that's not wrong. Simply put, I think it is impossible to stumble into an alternate world by normal logic. Since something extraordinary happened, we cannot take anything for granted. So we might get hurt if we take it for granted that we will be fine. Shiro's words stunned Neotsugu for a while, and he replied with a resisting expression. Your syllogisms sound really nasty. My point is that we can't ignore this too. You have a point, but... Neotsugu clenched and unclenched his fist repeatedly. Maybe he was doubting the reliability of his level 90 body. I want to make another thing clear. You might have missed it because of the uproar. But the new expansion pack should be in effect now. Novosphere Pioneers, right? Yeah, this means there will be new equipment, monsters, quests, and more zones as well, right? They might have remodeled some areas too. Now that you mention it, that is absolutely right. Shiro shifted his gaze away from Naotsugu and continued. Magic seems to work here. Choosing the magic from the menu is dangerous and slow in a live battle, but if we set it on the hotkey, we can cast spells after a short cast time. I have confirmed this. Yeah, I tried that too. All the skills I learned can be executed. But that doesn't mean we can win battles. Is that so? How tall are you, Naotsugu? I mean in real life. 183 centimeters, same as my game character. Naotsugu rubbed the top of his head. I see, so there should be no strange sensation for you. There is several cm difference between me and my character's height, so it feels a bit off. 8. Something like wearing shoes with thick soles. If the length of the limbs are different, this sensation is even more obvious. There are some differences between this body and a real body. This is not the body we are familiar with. Even if we can use swords or magic, how accustomed we are to fighting is an unknown. Ah, you are right, that is a bunch of troublesome problems. Another important matter is the difficulty in checking the status screen. Naotsugu had a surprised face as Shiro carried on. We can see the status screen by focusing on our forehead. If we form a party, we should be able to see each other's HP, but to do that in live battle will be hard. I'm still fine, but for Naotsugu, who is on the front line, it will be difficult to keep track of the status screen while fighting the enemies in front of you. You mean it is difficult to fight? I think it is better to keep this in mind. He did not explain it to Naotsugu, but the field of vision was crucial as well. You could make your point of view wider if you were playing from the monitor and see things from a wider angle. But currently, they could only see at an angle of 120 degrees in front of them. Take trolls and giants as examples. Fighting these huge foes would create blind spots that weren't there before. There were tons of problems in terms of battles. Anything else? Also, what is it? Is it hard to say? Shiro was surprised by his own troubled sigh. Frankly, the issues with battles and the difference in game environment were trivial. It could be troublesome and more challenging, but Shiro thought this was something they could overcome. The things he wanted to say made Shiro's heart heavy. He had been buying time by talking about unimportant things to prepare himself. What is it? Famous tactician. Although Naotsugu called him that, Shiro was not fit to be a tactician. Shiro would voice his thoughts because it was Naotsugu, but Shiro was used to thinking about all sorts of things by himself. Because of his attention to minute details, the debauchery tea party gave him the nickname of tactician. He had a way with words, so he took on the duty of planning and coordinating battles. The Japanese server of Elder Tales has 200,000 registered characters with 100,000 consistent players. That is correct. For players like Shiro, such numbers were common sense. Today is the release of the new expansion pack, so there are more people online than usual. From the ratio of the people who are online on my friend list, I estimate about 30,000 people are online. At this point, this should be correct. This alternate world is accommodating 30,000 Japanese. I am not sure about the North America, Europe, or China server though. Naotsugu nodded in agreement. So there are 30,000 people here. Shiro didn't use the word players intentionally. We have no laws or government. Naotsugu headed towards the city with Shiro. They tried to discuss further, but they lacked information to talk about, so they couldn't conclude anything. They need to focus on getting information for now. This was common sense while playing Elder Tales, but they weren't sure if it was applicable now. To play it safe, Naotsugu and Shiro formed a party. Parties were a way for people to interact. It meant a battle team. Unlike guilds, parties were temporary groups allowing you to check each other's HP and status if you were in it together. They could tell each other's distance and direction when in the same zone. Akiba was a non-combat zone. If you fought here, no matter if your opponent was an NPC or a normal player, the city guards would rush over in an instant and send the guilty party to jail. If the perpetrator attacked the guard, they would be executed on sight. There were many characters not controlled by players in Elder Tales. They were the NPCs in the game system, known in this world as people of the land. They mostly worked as shopkeepers, selling all sorts of things, or helped with administration, such as guild registration. They also acted like pedestrians in the streets, interacting with players by providing information or quests. Since all the guards were higher than level 100, the players were unable to resist them. Monsters wouldn't appear in the city. According to common sense in Elder Tales, this was one of the safe regions in this world. It was like summer once they exited the abandoned building, with the humid wind blowing across the whole city. The smell of mud was in the air, and the grass and leaves swayed with the wind. This scenery was too natural, making the idea, "we're in a game," vaporize from Shiro's mind. The presence of this world in his senses was too strong. The feeling of being in an alternate world was getting firmer. This was nothing like a game. Making a turn at the avenue, they reached a major road with 4 lanes. At the corner was a high-tech building made with composite materials looking like a memorial. Head straight along the Akiba Main Road junction and you would reach the city square in front of the metro. Every building was either collapsed or covered in vines, slowly being replaced by giant ancient trees. This was not like Akiba in the real world, a high-tech city made with glass and steel. The colorful signboards and flashy decorations were broken, either slanting or broken in half, hanging off the giant silver leaf trees growing beside it. The roads had been completely eroded by mud, and glimpses of the asphalt surface could only be seen on the major roads. The alleys were covered with mud and moss just like a trail in a natural park. The hybrid cars that had been abandoned since ancient times were enveloped by grass and were the habitat of small animals. This might be a sad sight, but it was still beautiful, like a painting in a way. It was not a polished kind of beauty, but the abandoned buildings decorated with the many colors of nature were full of life and vitality. The players and NPCs occupied these ruins as their home and set up stalls and shops on the roadside, giving it a feeling of a bazaar. This was the same as Shiro's hometown in Elder Tales. If it were the usual Elder Tales, there would be many players gathered in front of the city square, and people would set up shop and sell things to other players. Others would kill time here by waiting for comrades to go out for raids. It was a place full of life. But this place was full of confusion, chaos, and a complicated sense of frustration now. He could see at least a few hundred players here. Not only this, the surrounding ruins and narrow alleys that overlooked the plaza. He can also feel the stares of people standing on the deteriorated high-speed rails. Everyone must be here hoping for some form of savior. The game officials might appear in this place and explain the incident by announcing, "This concludes the event. Isn't it impressive, everyone?" They must have gathered here hoping for something like that. Even the players bearing such whimsical hopes were letting down their guard and conversing with others. The noise volume that he could hear was lower than he expected from such a crowd. They gathered in clusters all over the place. Some threw worried glances around, some would sob, while others would vent by cursing out loud. They may have realized unconsciously that anything might happen. But the crowd had no intention of doing anything about it, which annoyed Shiro. Do they plan to sit here forever? Really? Wow, I met someone's gaze. Shiro moved his side away in surprise. A pair of sorrowful eyes looked at him, pleading for help. Shiro didn't think he was mentally weak, but he didn't want to test himself in those muddy eyes. And, this is irritating. Just squatting there like they were paralyzed, not doing anything, yet still playing, irritated Shiro. He could empathize with them, but the sight of a few hundred players looking crestfallen was not good for their psychological health. Shiro was able to take action after overcoming his initial dejection by chance, and he got a hold of his emotions after meeting Naotsugu. He was no different than the players sitting there waiting to be saved, and Shiro understood that. Maybe that was the reason the feeling of irritation was so much stronger for him. Shiro, Isn't that Shiro Buyan? That came from a female voice. It was not too loud, but in this quiet and depressed atmosphere, the cheerful bell-like voice attracted a lot of attention. Shiro turned and looked for the source in surprise. Marine. That was too loud. This is too prominent. It's like a funeral procession here. What is the problem with that? Shiro was pulled by Marielle's hand. The woman who ignored Shiro's words and kept on talking was a female player, Marielle, also known as Marine. You came at the right time. I was just looking for Shiro Bo. Hey, may I ask, why were you looking for me? Woo-wah, what a beautiful lady. Shiro, where were you hiding this hot chick? You panties pervert. Please don't use the word panties now, Neatsugu. The three of them left the city square slowly and entered an inconspicuous alley. They didn't leave because they did anything wrong, but the atmosphere in the city square might give them tummy aches. And they were talking to Marielle, who was more famous than Shiro, so they had to be aware of their surroundings as well. What an impatient boy you are, Shiro Bo, bringing me to a place like this? That's not what I want. So you found a girlfriend. That was quick. That's not it? Sorry. Hey, this is Neatsugu. I am Neatsugu, friend of Shiro. How may I address you? I am Marielle. You can call me Maria Marine. Wow. Neatsugu-yan is handsome too. You guys are a combo? Marielle laughed gently. Although Shiro was observing her and trying to see if she had any hidden meaning behind this, there was no sign of malicious intent in her smiling face. She was hard to deal with because she meant what she said. Marielle, who was smiling so warmly despite the situation that they were in, was a cleric. There were 12 classes in Elder Tales. All the players, meaning all the adventurers, had to choose one of these classes to begin their adventure. Among the 3 healer classes, clerics had the strongest healing abilities. Healers helped survivability but were weak in attack, a class suitable for adventuring with parties but not acting alone. The principle of the healer class was to assist others. Players who chose this class were usually introverts, but Marielle was an exception. Wearing a long white robe for healers and a head of long green hair, she was an elf which usually had a cute appearance. She looked just like she did in Elder Tales. Because it was a game world, all the players were hunks and beauties, but some players just had the charms to attract the goodwill of others. In Elder Tales, which had a voice chat function, this was even more obvious. Marielle, who is from Osaka, had a cheerful voice and helpful nature. A lot of players knew her. Instead of just being popular with the opposite sex, she was popular with everyone because of her forthright style. Marielle would not act like a spoiled girl and was admired by people of both genders. Shiro was a veteran player, so he knew a lot of people. But Marielle was different from Shiro, a player who enjoyed helping others and had a wide network of friends. She was the guild master of the Crescent Moon Alliance, which had about a dozen or so members. She would hold parties in the pub in Akiba frequently, so she was well known in Elder Tales. You have such a gloomy expression. Hey, that's still okay? Do I look so gloomy? Shiro worried. Having a long face was normal in this situation, but he thought about how his facial features in the real world would reflect on the body of this world. In the real world, Shiro had been described as having wicked eyes. He didn't use contacts to avoid looking even scarier. In the Elder Tales that had become reality, hearing others call him gloomy made Shiro think they had discovered his wicked eyes feature from the real world, so he was a bit frantic. But Marine is also, Looking at Marielle, you could see that there were some differences between her and the typical forest elves. Anyway, I also don't want to be gloomy and I can understand how you feel. I've had enough. This is so ridiculous that I'm feeling psychotic. Bright hazel eyes, the contours of an elf with a hint of nobility, the slightly thick brows, and a big mouth that was smiling warmly. You could tell from her face that she was kind and warm, just how Marielle would look like. He had never seen Marielle in person before, but Shiro could feel that, this is indeed Marine. What kind of look is this? HMMPH, you must be thinking this is not my style, right? Marielle touched Shiro's forehead gently with her finger. My joking nature is my hobby, but the jokes I am making now are escapism. I'm really troubled right now. Is she always like this, Shiro? Yeah, she is always like this. But is she pretending right now? I can't tell the difference. Marielle's words surprised Naotsugu, but Naotsugu was beginning to understand her personality. Marielle laughed loudly at Naotsugu's reservations towards her, but she stopped and sighed under the stares of Shiro and Naotsugu. The situation is bad. Yes. Want to exchange information? That's fine. Where should we start? No, I remember. Let's be careful and talk at my place. Would you mind, Naotsugu-yan? Marielle invited them to her guild hall. They could relax there, so the trio went around the Fulledra Hotel and headed towards the guild building. The guild building was a facility available in all cities, and they usually housed other facilities, forming a multi-purpose mega-structure. For Akiba, the guild building itself was a zone with several NPCs working in the lobby. They were the staff of this guild building. You could form a guild by going to them. Players could join or withdraw from a guild by talking to them and going through the administrative process. There was also a branch of the bank here. Everyone in this game world had a bank account used to deposit cash or valuable items. There was also another important function for the guild building, the rental of guild halls. Guild halls were independent mid-sized zones ranging from 3 to 10 rooms of living space that doubled as an office. Some zones were open for sale in Elder Tales and players could buy and own them. They could set permissions for the purchase zone to allow the entry of specific players and design the interior of the zone as they liked. So many players also bought a small to medium-sized area as their residence. Although it was purchased, they need to pay maintenance fees apart from the indicated price. The upkeep fee is 0.2% of the sale price per month, so only players with a certain amount of wealth would dare to buy it. That's how guild halls came about, a zone that was specially made for guilds to rent. A guild that had a large enough scale would run a guild hall in the guild building. This way, items, ingredients and crafted items could be stored there. It also allowed members to gather and interact. Crescent Moon Alliance was such a guild, having their own personal space in this guild building. Shiro and Naotsugu walked up the stairs to the second floor of the guild building. Going through a set of double doors, Shiro and Naotsugu registered as visitors and entered the guild hall of Crescent Moon Alliance. The guild halls in Akiba Guild building had a basic retro design. Even though it was a basic design, it was just because of the floor and wallpaper that it gave off this feeling. You could decorate the zone you rented or bought any way you wanted to. The guild hall of Crescent Moon Alliance had been cleaned thoroughly by its members, making it a comfortable place. The walls were wooden veneer, giving it a warm familial feeling. We won't disturb other people here, right? Marielle walked further into the guild hall as she said this. Come in. No need to hold back. Take a seat. Please take a seat too, Naotsugu. After entering a room deep within the guild hall, Marielle pounced on a couch full of pink pillows and gestured for Shiro and Naotsugu to sit. This is quite a feminine room. That's right. I am a guild master after all, so my room needs to reflect the dignity of a guild master. Pink pillows, teddy bears, a princess bed, a painting of a noble-looking dog, and curtains with yellow laces. These decorations, in Shiro's eyes, had nothing to do with the word dignity. Shiro felt distraught staying in a place like this. He wouldn't feel this way if it were a screen from a game, but he could feel this atmosphere as he entered this space for real. He felt restless like an intruder in a private room. Fortunately, it was the forthright Marielle room. If it was the private room of any other girl, Shiro would have definitely retreated. But even if the decor was too flashy, the room of the guild master was very spacious. They also had 5-6 rooms for storage and workspace. A rental for a guild hall like this must be quite high. 40,000 with an upkeep of 80. About this kind of price, right? Shiro estimated in secret. This was the first time he was invited into this guild hall. How is your side coping with this, Marine? There are 19 people online including me. 18 of us are in Akiba. Everyone is afraid and is staying inside the guild hall. Don't be too concerned, they won't hear us if we aren't too noisy. Marielle should have been prepared for this as she answered Shiro's query smoothly. 18 in Akiba, meaning one of them was in another zone. Shiro found out after asking. That member was on an errand in another city. From what we know, Shibuya, Minami, Sakino and Nakasu are in the same state. This meant all 5 cities in Akiba's server were in the same situation. Marielle should have confirmed this using her wide network of friends. Could it be that? That's right, the inner city transport gate has stopped functioning. We have been isolated. Marielle answered Naosugu's queries. This was new information. Akiba, Shibuya, Minami, Sakino and Nakasu. These 5 places were the 5 major player cities in the Japanese server. Apart from these 5 cities, there were also many cities populated by stores and NPCs, but in terms of completeness of available services, these 5 cities were top class. These 5 major cities had been set to be starting cities as expansion packs increased the game contents. All players on the Japanese servers had to choose one of these 5 cities as their base of operation. There was also an inner-city transport gate in each of them, so it was possible to move instantaneously between these 5 cities. But they were not functioning right now. It means that going to Shibuya is still okay, but other cities will be difficult. Even if it is Shibuya, how many was it? We need to go through 7-8 zones to reach it. The shortest distance is 4 zones. Shiro replied casually. The inner city gates being down was a major problem. Elder Tales, which had a fantasy setting, used horses or walking as a primary means of transportation for adventurers. But with the implementation of the Half-Gaia project that created this world at half its scale, traveling this way took too much time. To deal with this issue, the game had fairy rings and the inner city transport gates as an alternative means of travel. The inner-city transport gates were set in the player cities, allowing you to teleport instantly to any of the 5 cities. With these gates down, the difficulty of commuting with faraway cities had increased rapidly. Take Sakino for instance. It was situated in Sapporo on the map of Japan. From Akiba, from Tokyo to Sakino, you need to go through a huge amount of zones. It would take at least a week even in the game. That was referring to in-game time, but in-game time should be the same as the time of this new reality from the look of things. Can you imagine? Why did things turn out this way? Shiro and the others could only answer with silence. Seeing Marielle's dejected expression, Shiro wished to answer this question, but he didn't have the ability to. Cheer up, Oni-san. Things are serious now, but it could be worse. Is that so? Naotsugu continued talking to the depressed Marielle. Even though we're trapped in this alternate world, there should be tens of thousands of Japanese here, right? Including the hundreds of thousands of players overseas. We have so many people in the same boat as us, so it's not the worst case scenario, right? We have a common language, some money on hand, and we can still talk in this room after barging into this world. Isn't this the best evidence? I haven't confirmed it yet, but our stamina seems to have strengthened according to our character's status. We can use swords and magic. In other words, we have been given the basic ability to survive in this world. Compared to classic fantasy novels where the characters travel to an alternate world, we're much more fortunate. You can even say it is a piece of cake. Naotsugu encouraged her strongly. Are you familiar with such things, Naotsugu? I'm quite alright. I've read quite a bit about this when I was still schooling. Even though it was a pointless question, Shiro was still impressed by Naotsugu. That made a lot of sense. He was used to seeing things pessimistically. That's why he missed the cheerful part. Marielle seemed to be the same. Yeah, you are right. She looked at Naotsugu with gratitude and hugged him all of a sudden. Yeah, you're right. Naotsugu Yan. Impressive. I'm so moved. You have saved me. Hold on. What's with her? Naotsugu struggled under Marielle's embrace, but Marielle ignored him and hugged him tight. Marie, you have visitors. A lady wearing spectacles knocked as she entered. She had an awkward expression as she looked at Marielle and Naotsugu. Sorry to intrude, Henrietta-san. Hello, Shiro-sama. Should I come back later? I was hoping you could stop her. On it. Really? Hey Marie, don't act in such a shameful manner. The lady entering on Shiro's request was Henrietta, in charge of the guild's accounts. She pulled Marielle back by her shoulders and lectured her. Wah, Henrietta, I heard some great opinions. Naotsugu Yan is right. He gave such a great speech. I'm not asking about this. Now is a crucial period. Consider the situation. Seeing the blushing and exhausted Naotsugu and the interaction between Marielle and Henrietta, Shiro laughed. Henrietta was a core member of the Crescent Moon Alliance and on good terms with Shiro. She was a bard in charge of the guild's finances, a competent character. From Shiro's perspective, he felt close to her since they both wore glasses. But looking at Henrietta in this alternate world, he felt this feeling was just his one-sided opinion. With wavy blonde hair, an oval face, and sharp chestnut eyes, she had a beautiful style like a secretary. She was wearing office clothing that showed off her mature and graceful beauty, which suited her very well. Shiro was just a graduate student who liked gaming. When their eyes met, Shiro felt he could not handle her. After Henrietta joined in, the four of them talked about their experiences so far and summarized their situation. But it had only been half a day. They still didn't really understand what happened. What should we do now? I think we should get in touch with our comrades through telepathy to avoid any confusion. Henrietta made a calm suggestion and Shiro agreed. Don't think too far, Ed. Just do what you could for now, or you would be swallowed up by the current state of affairs. This was what Shiro felt. That is correct, Marie. Shiro-sama and Naotsugu-sama both made good points. Fortunately, we have a guild hall, so for sleeping at night, it might be a bit of a squeeze, but I think it would be better for everyone to sleep here for now. That's right. Henrietta and Marielle's conversation made Naotsugu flinch. What is it, Naotsugu? Nothing, just that this is so sudden, I'm not sure what to do. Naotsugu denied in a hurry when he heard Shiro's question. He was always making dirty jokes but seemed so weak to direct attacks. Is Naotsugu Yan weak against breasts? One to touch. Naotsugu averted his eyes at Marielle's words, although he still took a peek. Breasts held the hopes and desires of men after all. Marielle is a beauty with a big bust after all, I can understand. Shiro agreed in his heart. Shiro was also bullied by Marielle when they first met. But Shiro insisted on putting on the attitude of, what about these 2 lumps of fat? They're heavy, please take them away. There was no need to emphasize on it, that was just a Shiro trying to be vain. The Elder Tales then was just a game, so the teasing was just through the conversation, while the screen showed their characters sticking together. Marielle had stopped teasing Shiro this way recently, since she probably got bored of it. Why is this Oni-chan acting so bold? It's scary. Marie came from a girls' school, and Osaka people will become like that in those kinds of environments. Marie. It doesn't matter since this is a game, but now is a crucial period, so restrain yourself. Marielle bore Henrietta's lecture with a dejected expression. The fact that she would humbly accept criticism, even though she was the guild master, was Marielle's good point. Shiro did not join any guild and didn't trust the guild system, but that didn't mean he disliked players in guilds. It had been several years since he developed his hate of guilds. He didn't really get over it, but he was able to accept it now. He had formed parties with Marielle and Henrietta several times. Marielle, with her wide network of friends, also gave Shiro a lot of help. If Shiro was not mistaken, the cheerful Marielle who liked to take care of others would keep her distance from Shiro, who was afraid of personal relationships, as a way to show her concern. Marine is mature in a different way from Naotsugu. She didn't do it to curry favor with Shiro or to balance their mutually beneficial relationship. The blessings that came along with Marielle's personality and kind nature, she didn't just give to Shiro, but to all those around her. Shiro thought so. But this type of skinship is troubling. WuxaWorldAudio.com. Right, Naotsugu is similar to me, that's why they hit it off so well. The Crescent Moon Alliance members probably gathered here out of their admiration for Marielle. It was a heavy responsibility to take care of almost 20 guild members. Since Marielle was a trustworthy and kind player, Shiro decided to explain in detail everything he had considered. As Shiro explained, Marielle paid special attention about the issues with battles and pointed out questions. She frowned when she heard about the number of people in the server and the conflict the players might get into. I see. You are right. After listening to you, I think that is very possible. Apart from violent incidents, they might be scams and pranks as well. Unlike Shiro, who only need to look after himself, Marielle need to protect all her comrades, and she was also a woman as well. That's right. Listen to him, Oni-san. Don't do that again. You need to have some common sense. Having a small brain is not good. Woo. You are right. My breasts are big, but my brain is small. But we just met. Do you need to be so ruthless, Naotsugu-yan? Naotsugu-yan is annoying. Idiot. Nope. Naotsugu-sama has a point. You need to correct this habit you have of hugging people since high school. These things don't matter, right? Henrietta, your real name is Amiko anyway. I told you not to use that. From the way they interacted, Henrietta and Marielle knew each other in real life. He was not sure how much of this serious topic went into their heads. Shiro's head started to hurt. Really, let's ignore this stupid girl. So we can't solve our current situation anytime soon. I think it would be better not to have such expectations. Shiro answered Henrietta's question. Isn't there something we can do about it? Marielle frowned as she said this, unable to accept that. Although he empathized with her, Shiro had already thought about that. That's why they were collating information now. The information on hand was too limited. Among all the things they could do, they prioritized gathering data, but that was not what everyone else would do. Marielle was not like Shiro and Naotsugu. She had to protect a lot of people as a guild master. But at the same time, she had more ways to handle things. Guilds might be a common entity, but their structures varied. The goals, activities and scale differed for each guild. It was an organization that could be very different from each other. In terms of contents of activities, an example would be battle guilds. One form of entertainment in Elder Tales was fighting. These type of guilds were made to support the members in battles. Their activities were raiding either in the open world or dungeons. Adventurers joined these guilds as it was convenient for them to form parties and fight as a team. Since the members knew each other, they would be more inclined to invite each other to form parties, and their teamwork would also be better. Akiba was the biggest city with the highest number of players on the Japanese server. The famous battle guilds were the Black Sword Knights, Honesty, D, and West Wind Brigade. Another type was production guilds. Apart from the battle abilities of the Elder Tales main classes, there were also all kinds of subclasses. Players who chose a production subclass which could forge items were known as artisans. The levels of the main class and subclass were separated. You could train both at the same time, but there were some who relied solely on the subclass skills to enjoy the joys of running a business quietly in the city. These type of players would join production guilds which could have a very grand scale. As guilds had the ability to provide ingredients in bulk as well as warehouse usage, they enjoyed more advantages the more people they had. Famous production guilds in Akiba were Oceanic Systems and the Roderick Firm. Marielle's Crescent Moon Alliance was a small-scale adventure support guild. These guilds supported both battles and production, a guild that helped each other and their members to achieve their goal. As they didn't specialize in any domain, their members didn't stand to gain much benefit, but the selling point was the warmth and peaceful atmosphere. Most small guilds belong to the adventure support style. In this group of guilds, Crescent Moon Alliance enjoyed quite a bit of fame. They were not as famous or influential as major battle guilds. Their income and scale paled in comparison to production guilds, but their support for mid-level players and their flexibility in doing things received a good evaluation from other players. Anyway, I think we should protect ourselves. Correct. From what I see, there are a lot of girls in this guild, right? Henrietta nodded at Shiro and Naosugu's points. Although battles were restricted in the city zones, there was no telling what might happen. There were also no ways to confirm the battle restrictions were still in effect. We need to find out about this later too. Shiro added a new page to his mental note. Also, I think you should recall all the market items you put out for sale. Market? Why? Because the market here referred to the services provided by NPCs in major cities. Players could deposit their goods with specific NPCs and set a price to sell them. Although the players usually traded among themselves if they have any excess crafted products or ingredients, the market was a convenient feature. Crescent Moon Alliance should have lots of resources, right? I think the members also deposited a lot of items to sell at the market. Even if it is still early, the price might change drastically. The items might have some new effects or new ways of using them. If you can spare the cash, I think it is better not to sell the items you have on hand. Yeah, understood, you're right. Also, we can't check things online anymore. Marielle and Henrietta nodded their heads seriously. When Elder Tales was still a game, Shiro and the rest were in front of a monitor and could surf the net as they played the game, which was the usual way of playing this game. Elder Tales was a huge and unbelievably complex game. The amount of information in the game world could not be grasped by any single player. The trusty tools supporting these players were the online guides, the maps and features of each zone, how to get to a specific area, what monsters would appear, items, where could you meet which NPC, and so on. Browsing for this information as you played was the common way to play Elder Tales. Although the online guides were not perfect, it would still contain popular zones or effective ways to grind. They would also note places that you should definitely stay away from. We came this time to exchange information, and information will be important from now on. Everybody remembers that today is the update of the expansion pack, right? The Novosphere Pioneers, correct? Yes, not only new zones, we will also need information for old zones as well as the city. Right now we can't check online even if we run into any minute problems. That's right. The four of them then proceed to draw a map centered around Akiba based on what they still remember. Even though there were tens of thousands of zones in the Japanese server, they also included all the hotel rooms, small ruins, and the personal space rented out to players like this guild hall. The field zones, including the forest, hills, the desolated suburbs and relics, as well as the relative fewer dungeon zones that included the underground metro or gigantic building structures. But such zones still numbered in the thousands. Even Shiro couldn't be sure he remembered all of them clearly. But Shiro was still an 8-year veteran player. His knowledge of Elder Tales surpassed other players. Naotsugu was on hiatus for a while, but he still had deep knowledge on the zones in the early eras. The two of them compared their recollections with Marielle and Henrietta and drew a serviceable but imperfect map of how the zones were connected. Writing the zones and linking them with lines, Shiro's group listed out hundreds of zone names surrounding Akiba Zone. Although they didn't know the necessity of investigating all the zones, this was better than nothing. Thank you, Shirobo and Naotsugu Yan. I have been in your care all this while after all. This is nothing to worry about. You have been a big help. I know Shirobo is a good kid. Marielle gave Shiro a smile like a sunflower as she said this. Marie's smile deserves full marks. Whether I'm tired or frustrated, it is still full marks. I hope I can be the same as her. I can't leave Marie alone after all. Although Shiro thought he had done his best, his words were unable to express his feelings. What? Even Shirobo is saying this? I am finished. I am fated to be a brainless dumb woman. What should I do, Henrietta? Start by restraining your playful nature. Shiro averted his gaze in a hurry. Wanna touch my breasts? Do you want to? Marielle tried tempting Naotsugu after seeing Shiro ignore her. Naotsugu knocked her head without a word. Do you hit me? Shiro thought Marielle's action was a way for her to conceal her embarrassment, but Naotsugu seemed to be doing the same thing in hindsight. It was interesting to see Naotsugu stop her. Don't you have the ability to reflect on your actions, you panties girl? Don't say panties. And what is with you, Naotsugu Yan? Are my breasts so bad? Are you treating me like a grandma? I don't know for sure, but you are not at grandma level yet. We should be about the same age, right? Naotsugu whispered his birth year to Henrietta, who nodded her head. Marie is 3 years older than you. So I am at the grandma level after all. An inferior product left on the shelf. That's why Naotsugu Yan is turning into a bad boy and acting rebellious against me. My poor breasts, already treated like wrinkled puddings. Marielle swung her legs on the couch to express her dissatisfaction. She is still obsessed over this. In this kind of situation, Marie deserves my respect in another sense. She had this kind of energy the first day she was stuck here. It must be Marielle's nature. Shiro was speechless, but Naotsugu patted her head seeing Marielle throwing a tantrum. Although it looked like someone soothing a big dog, Marielle was starting to calm down. It is about time to go. We have stayed quite a while. We will observe the situation outside some more. After making his intent known to the disgruntled Marielle and Henrietta, who had a serious face, Shiro stood up. Yeah, we should go. Sorry for intruding. It had been half a day since this tragedy happened. Some people might have pulled themselves together and battled with monsters once or twice. Shiro and Naotsugu bid farewell to the two, still sitting on the couch. I apologize for my poor hospitality, said Henrietta politely while Marielle stopped swinging her legs, stood up, and looked straight at Shiro and Naotsugu. Shirobo and Naotsugu Yan. That it might not be the right time to say this, but would you consider for your own convenience? Would you like to join us? That is to join the Crescent Moon Alliance. Marielle said this hesitantly, unlike her nature. It is nothing important. I know that you don't feel comfortable staying in a guild, Shirobo, but in the current state of affairs I think it would be helpful to join a guild. I think Naotsugu Yan is also not in a guild, so I want to try asking. Her troubled expression evolved into a face that wanted to convince them. From her voice, she didn't want to strengthen her guild by making use of Shiro and Naotsugu, but out of her pure kindness. Our guild is very relaxed and won't tie you down, alright? We won't do anything that irritates Shiro. The young ones here also challenged dungeons together with Shiro before, right? Like the underground of Shinjuku or Nakasu Commercial Building. I don't know why Shiro has not joined any guild yet, but I feel that our Crescent Moon Alliance is a comfortable place to reside in. What do both of you think? Marielle was not sure how to interpret Shiro's silence and added these words while gesturing with her hands. Her smooth green hair swaying on her white heeler robes, it looked like her way of showing concern in Shiro's eyes. Naotsugu looked at Shiro in silence. These eyes were saying, it is up to you to stay here or continue to roam freely. That was up to you to decide. Naotsugu expressed this to Shiro. Shiro was not in middle school anymore. Even though he still had misgivings for being used like a piece of equipment, he was able to let it go. But a feeling he was unable to describe in words was hindering Shiro's decision. "Sorry, Marine, but I can't yet. So that's how it is." "Yeah, it can't be helped then." Marielle had an expression of regret for an instant but smiled as usual straight after. Her smile was as cheerful as a sunflower, giving Shiro a sensation of salvation. If they could go back to the original world, if they received the miracles of God or due to some coincidence. If Shiro walked past her in the streets, he was confident he would know it was Marielle. Her healer robes, that full head of smooth hair, these were all equipment for the 3D models of Elder Tales. But Marielle's smile belonged to Marielle alone. No one else could emulate her. It was not a smile the game engine could recreate anyway. "Just tell us if you need anything. We will be happy to help." "That's right. Just find me if you need a reliable guardian." "Yeah." Shiro Boat Naotsubuyan. "Thank you both. Contact me if you need anything as well." Shiro waved goodbye to both of them and hoped to be as strong as Marielle himself. End chapter.